This Week in History with Mike and Will. I am Mike.
And I am Will.
And he is Will.
And he is Mike.
This is This Week in History, where Will looks up a historical event or person that happened in this week, and then he researches it.
Mm-hmm. I do, usually.
Then takes a little notes about it in a coffee shop, and then he comes here, and he has 1 hour to explain that event to me.
Yes.
Or thing, or person.
Yes.
So what are we discussing today?
Today we're discussing the death of Aella.
Death of Aella.
A-E, well, it's like an A mixed with an E. L-L-A. It's Old English. It's
you may have seen that in the title, if I can figure out how to make that font work. But if not, you'll see it differently.
We can Google how to figure it out. There's like a press these keys and it makes it happen. And then your computer could also explode.
There is a way to do it. I know there is a way. We'll see if I
Otherwise, it is often written as just A-E-L-L-A.
Either way, he's only got 1 hour to explain this to me. No matter how you say it or spell it.
Ready,
Will?
Yeah, Mike. Okay, so the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle was created during the reign of Alfred the Great, who reigned from 871 to 899.
Alfred the Great?
Alfred the Great.
I've not heard of him before.
Really? Well, then we're going to have to do an episode on him because he earned his name.
Okay.
Alfred the Great.
The Greats always do.
He is actually popular right now on television because he was mentioned or in the television show Vikings, and he was also a major character in the show The Last Kingdom, which is, I think, only on Netflix. There's a promo.
Sure. Now, to be sure.
But that's a book series and all sorts of stuff.
He's not famous for that.
Correct.
People playing the role.
People playing him have made him relevant in modern conversation, I should say.
It would be weird if he was suddenly back.
I'm back, baby. Alfred the Great is very famous for writing a lot. Like, he was big on, he studied Roman history and believed that it was important to write about what was happening now because otherwise people in the future don't know what's going on. It's also a great tool of propaganda.
Oh, that's true as well.
He personally commissioned the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, so it very strongly defends what Alfred the Great, who was the King of Wessex, did. Even if it wasn't always what we would consider the best course or the right thing to do.
But he did write it down.
What's really cool about the Chronicle is that it was maintained into, like, I think 1129.
Oh.
So it was maintained for almost 400 years. People added to it.
He started it. Where was it held?
It was kind of, he held it originally at his capital in Winchester, which is in Wessex. Wessex is part of England now, but originally, we'll get into a little bit of the history of all the kingdoms of England as part of this. But originally, he started it, and different priests and monks wrote it, and then it was kind of passed around, or it was maintained and then put together in central locations. So today, there are 9 existent manuscripts for it, but some have been lost to time, so there's missing pieces. Obviously,
was it ever rewritten, edited?
Yes. Well, I don't think it was. It was probably edited as far as like, well, this is a misspelling, but I don't think
propagandized.
I don't think it was altered. I don't think the original texts were altered.
Okay.
It was just because priests at the time, a big thing. Well, not priests, but monks. A big thing that monks did was copying text. That was like their thing. They were some of the only people that could read and write, and they would make these beautiful, what they call illuminated manuscripts. Those are the ones with the really cool pictures and drawings where, the capital G has like a bird living in it and a tree growing out of it, and the all of the filling in.
Well, I suppose if you're a monk and you got no TV, radio, and can't have a girlfriend, nothing but time.
Well, that's why the monks got really good at like brewing and farming and writing. You get really good at your hobbies. Everything else is a sin, but hobbies are usually fine. So the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is our major source of information for this time period. But note, it's written after the event that we're going to talk about, because the event takes place on the 21st of March, 867. The issue is that the majority of this history, the rest of the kingdom didn't necessarily feel strongly about writing stuff down. And even though Alfred the Great was king in 871, he was alive when these events happened in an adjacent kingdom. So this is a source of our information. The other source we'll get into a little bit later, but the
secret source.
So the major source of this, though, is the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, and then some writings from some local priests. But most of that is not contemporary. It's like 200 years later.
Okay.
But we have good stuff about these things because they believed in keeping notes. So we talked Anglo-Saxon. What does that mean, and who are these people? Everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people these days think the English are like this homogenous group.
Yeah.
And they are not.
No.
They're not remotely close. Nobody in England is like a pure-blood Englishman.
Oh.
That's not a thing. The closest you have would be the Welsh, who are the Britons. The Britons are thought to be the original occupants of the majority of England.
Aren't they the most hated group in England?
Yes.
That's funny.
Yes. They have an interesting language. That's why they have a lot of like consonants in a row. They have it's a very different language because it's the closest, truest to what true original denizens of England spoke, because it hasn't changed much.
Is that the place that has like the longest city name?
They deliberately made it the longest city, and it's like Apwyn, Luachlin, Lagulin, and Guguguguff. It's absurd, but people, like everyone from Wales, can say it, which is awesome. Sure. It's a nice little thing. But to see the sign, it's 12 feet long, and the letters are only like 2 or 3 inches across. It's just huge. I think it's like 80 letters. It's some dumb thing. But apparently that's a relatively new thing. Anyway, so the original, we'll just call it England. So that chunk of land that consists of Wales, England, and Scotland today had 3 really distinct cultural groups on it. It had
the Welsh, the Scottish, and the...
Kind of. Yes, it had the Welsh, the Scottish, and the Irish.
Yeah.
So the...
Didn't see that coming.
Yeah, the Welsh, the modern Welsh. So the Britons... Who are the Britons? Well, we're all Britons, and I'm your king. Well, I didn't fight for you. Sorry, have to do the Monty Python. The Britons occupied basically up to what modern Scotland is. Okay. Then the Scots there were called the Picts.
Yes.
And they're always depicted as tattooed and covered in what's called woad, which is like a war paint, and they're very savage. But that's, mostly propaganda of the time, because everybody at that time looked that way. We're talking like Iron Age. Barely. This is the pre-Romans. This is BC times. Okay, so it's much more primitive than, modern.
This is the time that we're talking about now?
What we're building into.
Okay.
So the Picts and the Britons are kind of like what we would consider a more savage people. Tribal society, huts, not castles, stuff like that. Sure. And then they'd be called like the Gaelic folk, or the Gaelic folk, are Irish, basically. And they live kind of at where England ends and Scotland begins, and there's just a little chunk on the coast very close to Ireland. And
then at some point, like Pangea, that little chunk floated out to the sea.
Well, I think the idea is that the people who either traveled to Ireland, then traveled to like England, or the people who like developed in England moved to Ireland. I think the Irish culture is pretty homogenous. It's very, you're Irish.
Yeah. How far away is Ireland from England land-wise?
It's only like, I think 50 miles or something. It's a short span of water.
It's boatable.
It looks like if you had England as one chunk and then you just went and you just shifted it. It's not far at all.
That's how it happened.
Ireland's pretty close to England.
But you can't swim that far. Well,
I
one
think
could.
You probably could if you're like one of those I swam across the world types. Sure. But the average person, you die. Like I'll swim 100 feet and then I'm gonna drown. Yeah, I'm tired. Unless I backstroke. I can backstroke a while. Yeah. But this is an ocean, so it gets cold, it's choppy, and you're probably gonna die.
If you get halfway, the tide will take you the rest of the way.
You might not be alive when you get there, but it will. All right, so that's the original group we have. Then in 43 AD, the Romans conquered it.
Hey, Romans back.
Now before this, in like I think 50 BC-ish, 55 BC, I think.
Round it up.
A fellow named Julius Caesar was like, I'm gonna conquer that, and he basically sailed across the channel and then went, this is stupid, and then left. Oh. Because he couldn't crack the English. Oh. They were just, the local Britons were vicious fighters who were very protective of their land, and they saw the Romans coming, and then the Romans, when they landed, basically had no idea what they were doing or what the lay of the land was. So he scouted, planted his flag, and said, all right, this is Rome, and then he left.
Oh. But Julius Caesar was actually in...
Yes. Julius Caesar landed in England and then left. It was all part of his conquest of Gaul.
I see.
I think we did an episode on it. If we didn't, we're gonna.
Not specifically, maybe, but I guess I didn't know that he made it. He himself had made it.
Yeah, there's a.
I suppose all he has to do is come back and go, "Yeah, I did it." Yeah. What are you gonna do?
I read a really fascinating book about it that describes the culture of the time. Even goes down into like the food content of the grain. And it's Caesar against the Celts. I should remember the writer's name, but it's quite a fascinating book. We'll talk about that one. That's a good one.
Okay.
So the Romans, it took them a while to conquer England, but from 443 AD to 410, they basically worked their way up to Scotland and then built a wall because they couldn't get into the Highlands without just getting destroyed by what are called the Caledonians at the time.
We can't get in, but you can't get out.
So they're like, well, the Scots keep murdering us because we murdered a lot of people, and they're rightfully angry, and they don't like us as colonizers.
Sure.
So
I'm sure they had that moment of self-reflection.
Yes. Like, it was probably more like, why won't you just be Roman?
Yeah, probably.
Everybody else is fine with it, says nobody else in the rest of Rome. So we have this period of conquest. Now, this doesn't mean that all the Britons are massacred and moved away. They start to integrate with the Romans. And the Romans are not all Italian. The Romans are a heterogeneous group of people that are, some of them are German, some of them are modern French.
Most of Europe is.
Yeah, most of Europe, yes. Yeah. By the end of the Roman Empire, it's a huge swath of Europe up to, like, Northern Europe, like modern Denmark and Germany. And then basically everything south of that is Rome.
Yeah.
So you have this very diverse group of people occupying all this land. During this also, from 375 to like the mid-800s, you have what was called the mass migration of Europe. The Germans refer to it as the Volkerwanderung.
Yeah, we do. This is what we do.
Literally, Volker is people, and Wanderung means hike, so it's people
hiking.
But it mixed together means migration.
Okay.
But what this was is all of these Germanic tribes, so we've got like the Visigoths, I think the Andals, and just a ton of people are moving westward, largely because, well, it wasn't the Andals. They moved because of the Andals and the Huns and the Slavs and the Bulgarians were kicking the crap out of them and conquering, and they were migrating as well, largely because of changing temperatures and environmental shift and all that. So
were they migrants? Were they fleeing?
A lot of them were running
kind of a
away.
Slow flee.
So in chunks it would be, the Huns are here. Very fast to get to here. But since this took place over hundreds of years, it's just this mass spread of people, which would freak people out nowadays. So they'd be like, national borders, you're crossing into our territory.
True.
Humans migrate.
Yeah.
Just like every other animal on the planet.
Well, I guess that's what I was asking too. Although you probably wouldn't freak out as much if it happened over the course of 100 years.
Yes. So sometimes this would cause a problem. So Rome had an issue with when Caesar was in charge of the Swabian people, who were a Germanic tribe.
Swabian?
Swabian.
Oh, I thought they were Slav.
They were not Slav. They were big and mean and fighters. But the Swabians had a tribe of like 200,000 people, all of whom wanted to suddenly move across a river into Roman territory. Now, when you are a renowned warrior...
So they were Wadians.
Nope. They didn't wade. They used boats.
Oh, okay. Don't Wadian. Bodian.
Bodians.
Salians.
They would move in big chunks, and that would cause problems because now you have 200,000 people moving into an area that you've occupied, and you're like, now there's not enough food for anybody, and you guys are warriors, and we're warriors, so we have to fight.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah.
So again,
what else are we gonna do?
Poor policy of just militant fighting people off and be like, you can't come in here, rather than, okay, well, let's figure this out and have everybody moving as we need to. But also there's a sense of urgency because the Huns are chasing you down and burning your lands and killing your people and taking it.
Watch out for the Huns.
So you're trying to escape from that.
Sure.
Well, we wind up with German people living in England and even Huns, because some of the Huns started to integrate with other cultures. So England now is Britain, it's Roman, it's French, it's
a mess.
German, it is not a singular culture.
It's just like
you even
America.
have people from North Africa moving there because those are also Roman citizens.
All right.
And if you're a Roman citizen, sometimes you join the legion and then you get deployed. And when you get deployed as a soldier, a lot of the times, if it's to the far reaches of the frontier, you just stay there when you're done.
You want to go back home?
Well, you served for 20 years. What are you going to go back home to?
True.
Your family's probably all dead or moved.
It's a long walk, too.
You come from almost nothing. True. Now you have a career, and you probably get a parcel of land as part of retirement. And the Romans really liked to give out land of new conquered territory to veterans that they knew were loyal, even if they weren't, like, born in Rome.
It's easy to give away stuff that you don't own.
Well, yeah. Well, and also, nobody's here, and it's a huge chunk of territory, and we want to make it part of our country, so we'll give it to people that are our soldiers, our citizens, and they'll live here, and they'll farm it for us, and they'll develop it, and they'll be loyal if they need to defend stuff. We'll just be like, hey, all you soldiers, let's kick some butt. And they'll be
you like that land?
Would you like to keep it?
You want to keep it?
Yeah.
Sharpen up your swords, boys.
So that happens up until 410, and then after 410, there's a much bigger influx of Germanic folk who were the Angles and the Saxons from northern Germany. Yeah. And this becomes known as the Anglo-Saxon period up until 1066 AD, which is when the Normans conquered it, and we talked about that with William the Conqueror in the Battle of Hastings.
Yes.
So until then, this is very Anglo-Saxon. It's very Germanic. But also, there's the city of Londinium, which is London. Ooh. And others, there's York, which is a Roman fortress city.
And now called
York.
There we go.
I mean, it wasn't called York by the Romans. I forget what they called it. It's actually called Jorvik because that was what the Norse called it when they conquered it.
Oh, okay.
So it was a Viking city.
Jorvik.
So that's what's going on here. Now, the Saxons start to develop it into their own kingdoms. They don't make like one unified kingdom. And eventually it whittles down to 4 kingdoms, 3 during our time. The 4 main kingdoms were Northumbria, which is the northern chunk of England. Okay. It's quite large. Mercia, which is in the middle, and Wessex, which is in the west. And then there was East Anglia, but Mercia eventually conquered East Anglia. By 794, it was all Mercia. So Mercia is like the big, rich central farmland. Northumbria is a little rougher country, but still it's England, so it's all pretty decent farmland, or at least pasture land. And then there's Wessex, which is where Alfred the Great rules. Okay.
Do you know where Mercia comes from, that word? Is it connected to the word mercy or not?
I don't think so.
All right.
I should have looked it up. It's Old English.
No worries.
But if you guys know?
I just figured Northumbria, I got that one. East.
Yep, East Anglia. Anglia, because that's where the Angles lived. Wessex is the west. I think Mercy is middle. I doubt that's it.
And the rest.
So that brings us up to just shy of where we're at now in history. So that explains, like, Anglo-Saxon culture. That's where we're at. Those are the people that we have. These are not, we're English. Those people who say, oh, we're English. Well, you're French and German and possibly Spanish.
Yes.
You're a gajillion different things.
But they've now, the modern day English has
yes. But it's kind of like
codified it a bit.
Yeah, they think it's very interesting when they're like, well, we're British, and that's very coded language because it's. Do you know what that means? Because a lot of people don't know their own history. It's kind of like us saying we're American. We're a ton of different groups of people.
Yeah.
You know, you can do your 23andMe and all these genetic background checks. And you're like, oh wow, I'm Mesopotamian. Interesting. Because we come from all over the place.
We come from land down under.
That's a great song. I love that. Men at work?
Yeah.
Love it. All right. In 789, 3 ships that are... this type of ship has not been seen before in England, lands on the Isle of Portland in Wessex, which is kind of the very bottom and middle of England.
Okay.
And the local reeve, who now at this time a reeve is the agent of the king. He's not a sheriff, but he's kind of like a headman of a region. He collects taxes. Well, he thinks these are merchants. I'm going to go collect taxes from them.
Welcome.
Yeah, give me money.
It's a good way to start a relationship.
It doesn't go well. He's promptly murdered.
Oh, my.
And his body's just left behind.
Oh, dear.
And these 3 ships sail on, and nobody knows much more about them.
They don't know?
Nope.
Well, he just went there by himself?
I think he brought men.
And
they all got killed.
Oh.
Everybody died.
Okay. Right.
But for sure, he died. But if he brought anybody with him, they all died too, because there's not like there might have been a survivor of these guys showed up on these boats and they killed us.
Yeah.
But that was the extent of that violence. There wasn't a further attack, so nobody knows a lot of details other than these ships showed up. Everybody knew about the ships. The Reeve showed up. The Reeve got killed, and everybody ran away or died that tried to deal with these guys.
We have a mystery here.
In the chronicles of the time, people start talking about how there's pirates. New pirates that they haven't dealt with before. They're not English, but they're pirates, and they're quite good at it. In 793, the monastery of Lindisfarne.
Sorry?
Lindisfarne. Lindisfarne. Lovely little monastery. So the monks are going about their daily routine. Everything's fine. Probably making beer.
Writing stuff.
Writing.
Thinking not sinful thoughts.
And ship lands, and a bunch of large men in armor with weapons get out and just start killing people and stealing stuff.
Oh no, we thought it was 3 ships. They've split up.
Yeah, well, this is 4 years later.
Oh.
So there probably were 3 ships for this. There were multiple ships for this, but it wasn't like a massive hundreds of guys thing.
Yeah, okay.
It was like 50, maybe 100 show up. And they kill a bunch of priests, they take some as slaves, and they steal all the treasure, because monasteries had a lot of wealth. We're talking, gold crosses. Well, these people, who we now know as Vikings. So for a while, Lindisfarne was thought to be the very first Viking raid. It's one of the bigger ones. It's recorded because the monks were like, these people are killing us right now. Send help.
What does I gotta get this right.
Whereas the attack in Portland, there wasn't a monastery hit.
Sure.
But there's a lot of references to these ships, so we've been able to put it together that this is what happened.
Well, plus, I don't know, their first attack, the dude that went up and said, hey,
give me money.
Give me your money.
Probably not.
I feel like if I was a Viking on a long voyage, I'd be like, not today.
I'm not taking this crap right now. It has been 3 weeks on a very shaky boat on the ocean, and I'm not doing this. So
we gotta do paperwork now too?
Yeah,
no,
right?
No.
Yep. Not, hey guys, you want to hang out? You guys just want to trade? Did you want to do stuff? Yeah. Come on in. Welcome to England. He's just like, give me money. Yeah. For all I know, the guy tried to strong arm him and thought, maybe that's something he did. Because the island of Portland is one of those weird little, it's kind of connected to the mainland, but if the high tide comes in, it can cut it off.
Sure.
So he's kind of like ruling it like it's its own little sovereign kingdom, maybe, and he's like, I just extort people when they come here.
That'd be a good modern version of Brigadoon. Like, you can't get to it, but it didn't disappear. It just, watered off.
The water just came in. Yep.
A little mental note for the rewrite of Brigadoon.
There you go. So these Vikings now, these raiders, show up, and they sack Lindisfarne. They don't kill everybody. They leave people behind.
Women and children.
There weren't women and children there. It's a monastery.
That's right. Just the...
But they realize these guys aren't warriors, so yeah.
Only monks with mustaches.
Now, these guys were on a boat for a while, and their entire life is built around pillage, plunder, and murder, and taking other people's stuff.
Yeah.
The Vikings did also trade, but these guys were raiders. This is very different. They do raids typically to the eastern lands, but this is when they started going, oh, there's land over there that's green and nice.
Yeah.
And we live in Norway, where it's cold and sucks.
Yeah. And we poke those guys with the shaved heads, they give us beer.
And they give us beer. And they have these really shiny square things with a bunch of little... They call them pages? Because Vikings at the time, while they did have like a written language or rune language, they didn't keep books. Oh. That's not a thing for them. So they don't see value in these things. Okay. But as a trade good...
Sure.
Plus, a lot of them have ink is really expensive because you have to make it all by hand from special things. It's not like you can just go get red dye. You have to get a bug and grind it up and mix it with water.
Or just go get a pencil.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't have those.
They didn't have those. So that's like charcoal and water. Yeah. That's why black ink was so common. They use that. So now you've got these guys who go, So there's these isolated communities with a bunch of guys who don't have weapons, but they have beer and food and these cool metal cross things.
Yeah, shiny.
That we usually nail people to, but they worship some guy who got nailed to it, which is real weird that they carry around the thing that killed him as a symbol. That's super Viking-y. We do that. That's great.
Sure.
These guys are brutal, but they don't fight. So we can just take their stuff.
Yeah.
So let's just do that. Okay. And it becomes extremely popular and like fun for Vikings to just show up, find these isolated monk communities.
Fun for the Vikings.
Yeah, it's not fun for the monks at all. They do not enjoy this one bit. And monks are usually in isolated positions because they're given all this land, and then they just kind of run it how they want. That's what the church did. And then they sometimes have like market days, and local villages meet up at the monastery because it's usually a large stone building with walls. If it's near a town, that's where people would go in times of trouble. But the monks are just kind of doing their thing. Monasteries weren't the same as like a church where the priest goes and taxes and tithes. The monks are they can generate their own revenue because they make things and they sell things.
Yeah.
But they do also sometimes get stipends. It's different from different monastery to different monastery.
Okay.
But so these guys are just minding their own business, and the Vikings show up, start killing people and taking their stuff. Not fun for them. And for the Viking culture, reputation is everything. By fighting, by seizing goods.
Even from people who can't fight
doesn't
back?
matter.
Oh.
Fight it, like, because you brought spoils home. Slaves and spoils, that's reputation. You did a new thing. You're the first guys to raid England. That's cool. Like, you sailed across the ocean. You sailed across the ocean, which is dangerous, and survived, and now you're back.
And killed some unarmed people.
Yep. Reputation. But to be fair, the Christians were doing the exact same thing to people that were unarmed in other parts of the world.
Not those same Christians.
Not those same Christians. Obviously not.
These are the ones who stayed home and didn't do it.
Everywhere where they go, where there's these unarmed people who are just getting killed, it's always these... And
strange how the unarmed people...
I'm not saying that everybody should be using weapons, but maybe the people who are really violent should just not go around killing people. That's kind of the problem.
Sure.
Because even in situations where you're minding your own business and you are extremely well armed, you get attacked and murdered a lot of the time.
Well, tell you what.
It's a good thing things are better.
Why don't you go tell the well-armed people that?
Okay.
Good luck.
But I'll probably be well armed when I do it. That's the problem. Yeah. So the Vikings have this very militant culture of fighting. Their gods are all violent. Like Odin's a warrior, Thor's a warrior, friggin' Freya are warriors. They're all warriors. So that's like part of their culture. Plus, they're constantly battling nature just to live. So they're like, well, yeah. Why aren't you fighting?
It's not an excuse.
Why aren't you guys fighting? You should be fighting. Everybody fights. Everywhere we go, they always fight. You guys don't fight? This is stupid. Oh, let's take your stuff. This goes on for a number of years, and this is a huge problem now.
Sure.
The Vikings realize this is easy.
Yeah, they keep turning the other cheek.
Because their alternatives, they can raid other Nordic countries.
Sure, they're ready.
But it's like, we raid the same people for 50 years, and they don't have anything.
It's all the same stuff, man.
It's cold, and it's barren, and they're dealing with the same problems we're dealing with. They don't have as much wealth. But these guys just keep it in houses with no guards.
You think they'd have to rotate their crops?
They did have they would rotate their
we're going to come back in 30 years, and that time get some better stuff.
Smart raiders don't burn everything down. They raid, and then they take it away, and then they raid, and then they pick a different town. This is why the Vikings basically just sail around England, and they do a loop.
No, sure.
That's a whole thing.
Time we're back.
Because they raided the same places multiple times.
You better have this place fixed up so we can break it again.
You better have some new crosses we can take. We melted down the last ones and made money out of it. Now
we spend that money.
We spent it. We need more.
All right.
So this becomes commonplace. Now, once they start raiding the monasteries, so this is just little isolated communities. What about the bigger communities?
Yeah.
What about towns?
That's always happens. Always more.
If one building has money,
sure,
many buildings have many money.
Yeah.
So fast forward to 835. The Isle of Sheppey, which is also England. Sheppey. This is the first recorded large-scale raid.
Okay.
Apparently, more, because typically it's like 3 ships and 50, 60 people show up.
Sure.
This was like hundreds of people show up, and they stayed in the area raiding it constantly. And then 20 years later, it was such a fertile ground, they kept hitting it. They landed there and stayed there and made it their winter quarters. So that they could raid all of England from this island. So I'm sure the people of Sheffield are like, this is great.
Awesome. We thought we had a nice island.
I thought it was nice. And they're like, yeah, it was. It was a nice island. That's why we moved here. Now it's ours. Whack.
All right. Carry on.
Mine now. So that's what's going on in England.
Sure.
Right now. This is a serious crisis. England is at this point a Christian nation. There are still some pagans, but it's almost exclusively Christian. Wessex is very Christian. Alfred the Great is famous for being very devout. Most of the kings were, except in Northumbria. In Northumbria, we have a King Osbert, who it's OSBHYRT. There's one that's spelled differently. So OSBERHT, but there's a version of it where it's OSBYR like TH or something. Osbert. But Osbert. Osbert is written about by a chronicler named Simeon of Durham. Simeon of Durham was one of the chroniclers I talked about earlier, who wrote about this like 200 years after. So he was common in the like 1100s. He wrote the Historia Regnum Anglorum, which is the history of the English kings.
Okay.
Apparently another monk whose name was Berthferth. Yeah. BYRHTFERTH. Berthferth. This has got a very complicated, difficult name.
Yeah.
He actually wrote a book about science. And that was like one of his more famous books. But he apparently wrote the first 5 like segments of the Historia Regnum. So they're considered to have written it together.
Okay.
They were contemporaries. I think what probably happened is Bertie started the book and then Simeon finished it. Yeah. They wrote that Osbert of Northumbria just took abbeys and church land. He's just like, this is mine now.
Yeah.
Which is a Viking move. Like they say like, oh, the Vikings are the ones doing this. This guy is an English king. And he's just like, mine now.
So they wrote that he did that?
They wrote that he did that. So apparently he probably did
do that.
He did do that.
The way you said it made it sound like
they're telling lies.
Yeah.
So Northumbria's history is only really solid from like 867 onwards.
Okay.
Before it, it's kind of muddy because they didn't keep records like in Wessex. That was where.
So shortly really after the event that we're talking about today.
Shortly after the event, that's how things happen.
Yeah. Someone get a pen.
Someone write this down. But what we know from the time, though, is that there were a series of pretty nasty kings who... There was a fight with the church a lot of the time between royal powers and church power. And it was... The king would say, I own all the land, and then the church would be like, you don't own our land. We own the land because it's given to us by the church, and you can't fight with God. And then he would say, well, God didn't give it to you. I own the land, and the Pope says you get to have it, and he's just some guy in Italy, and I don't care what he thinks. You're not going to tell me what to do. So there's a lot of fighting.
Fortunately, we've figured out all that.
We've solved religion.
Separation of church and state. We've got to figure it out.
We figured it out. We figured that out. We figured out violence.
Good job, team.
We nailed it.
All right.
We figured out power abuses from people in power, so it's fine. Everything's fine.
Learned from history.
Great. We've learned so much from this. So Osbert is not well liked, and he was deposed because he was not well liked. But he wasn't killed. Just another guy came in, and that fellow's name was Aella. Aella was born around 815.
Aella.
Aella.
You got me on my knees. Aella.
Begging you, please, don't kill me, Aella.
Up until you said I had assumed Aella was a female.
A female. No, King Aella. Aella is born around 815. We don't know exactly when.
Okay.
He would have been a member of the nobility. It's written that he might have been Osbert's brother, but only in one source. that I could find. So he might be Osbert's brother. He might not be Osbert's brother. But he would have been a member of the nobility because no peasant is going to walk in, claim king status, and then everyone's going to be fine with it.
Unless it's a real ballsy peasant.
Unless it's a really ballsy peasant, but then you'd have a new kingdom. They wouldn't keep calling it Northumbria.
I am royalty.
You're the peasant next door.
No.
Yes, I saw you shoveling cow poop.
Yes, I like to be among the people. Give me a king.
You like to be among the poople.
Give me a crown.
No.
Take the crown.
Good. No, he took my crown. That's how that's Aella. That's what Aella did. He
just walked in.
He was the shepherd shoveling poop one day, and then it was like, this, the priests say you suck. Give me.
There you go.
Now, we're going to see a bit of the family resemblance because apparently immediately after taking power, Aella is renowned as a tyrant who stole church land from like 6 churches.
They found that out right after
once he took power, he just kept doing what Osbert did.
Sure.
So allegedly the reason why he took power from Osbert is he was robbing the churches. He robbed 2 churches. Aella triples that number in a couple of years. He's like, oh, well.
Put numbers up on the board.
Well, now I get why you did it.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
It's kind of like why those raiders showed up at Lindisfarne. They just keep this stuff sitting around in a house and they don't have soldiers.
Have you guys tried stealing for the monks? It's so much fun.
This is great. So yeah, I do think it's funny that they're like, the Vikings were so mean to the Christians. The kings are doing this to their own people.
Yeah. Because it's so freaking easy, man.
How dare you be pacifists living in a nice house making stuff? Gimme.
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't know how to make a thing, and you just decided to take somebody else's stuff. Yeah.
This is making me sad. Keep going.
All right. Moving right along. Well, don't worry. Everybody's getting their comeuppance.
Yeah, sure. They're all dead by now.
Well, yeah. That'd be weird if they weren't. This is more than...
I heard Alpha the Great is coming back in popularity.
So I've been asleep a while. What happened? What I miss? Who's this Charles guy sitting on my chair? Mine now.
King Charles.
Wow. So yeah, he's not. Aella's not really any better. He's actually objectively worse if we're just going by numbers of churches that he's robbing.
Okay, but he learned it from the Vikings.
Yeah, he's probably going to blame it. Well, he is mad at the Vikings.
Sure.
He's like, how dare pagans raid churches? Only I, a good Christian, get to raid churches.
That's right.
And it's my churches, so I can do that. You can't raid it. It's kind of like I can call my mom a name, but you can't call my mom a name. She's my mom, and I'll dare you. It's well, you were just calling your mom names. Yeah, my mom. Well, you were just raiding your own churches. We thought we could too. No, you can't raid these churches. They're my churches to raid. You're basically robbing me before I get to rob them. How dare you? So Aella's
the logic of kings is great.
Very offended by all of this. Yeah. He's very mad about this. He sees it as a problem. Now, mostly, Northumbria is not the ones suffering the most. Wessex and Mercia are the ones getting hammered the most because they're richer lands. Northumbria is a poorer kingdom, and the other 2 major kingdoms kind of poop on Northumbria. Like, well, that's a bunch of barbarians. Look at you guys robbing churches.
It's a way to not get robbed. Is just be poor. Have you considered being poor to start with?
Have you tried to be poor so nobody else who's poor?
Tell you what, it's really easy to be poor. All right.
And then the Vikings like, what are you talking about? We were robbing the poor people until we realized you guys had more money. We'll rob them too once we rob all your stuff.
Oh, no.
So Aella's not as focused on it, but now that the raids are starting to hit him, now he suddenly cares. Even though Wessex and Mercia have been dealing with this stuff for like 70 years. Yeah. Now Aella's like, oh, well, it's now on my doorstep. Yeah. So now I care. It's a good thing we've gotten over that problem,
we solved that one.
Of caring, even if something doesn't affect us, knowing that somewhere down the line it's going to affect us. I heard the expression the other day is the penny wise, dollar foolish, where it's like you pinch your pennies today because you're like, well, you never know what you're going to need. But down the line, you just waste all this time. So it's like if you just invested for the future or planned for the future, maybe you would have learned something. This is very much like the, I didn't protect the socialists because I wasn't a socialist. I didn't protect the Jews, but because I wasn't the Jews. And now they've come for me, and no one's left to protect me. So he's like, well, I didn't protect the Mercians because I wasn't a Mercian, and I didn't protect the Wessexians because I'm not from Wessex, and it's hard to say. I didn't protect Lindisfarne because I'm not from Lindisfarne, and now they're here. Why aren't you guys helping me?
No.
Oh, you're all dead and on fire.
Oh, good.
Well, poop. So, at this time, we now shift our story to Scandinavia.
Scandinavia.
There is a fellow named Ragnar Lothbrok.
Ragnar.
We have talked about Ragnar Lothbrok. Ragnar Lothbrok was a legendary semi-mythical figure. The reason why he's semi-mythical is he exists in all of the Viking records, but he is not listed in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and he's not written about in English records. But his kids are.
Okay.
So the very people that they're in all of the Viking lore are his children are in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. We're going to find out why. But the father is not mentioned. Now, in a very famous Norse story called the Ragnarson Thatra, which means Tale of Ragnar's Sons. So, the Ragnar sons.
Sure.
Ragnar Lothbrok is famous for being a very young man when he becomes king of Sweden and I think Denmark, and he becomes a famous raider. He fights off all of these guys who basically come in and try to take his kingdom, and he's a renowned warrior. He marries a very famous shield maiden who were... the concept of the shield maiden has been argued a gajillion times. Most of the people who hate the idea are angry men who don't like the idea that a woman could fight. But we've found like bodies of women soldiers who were buried with their arms and armor, and
I don't know. Will, if they were so good, why'd we find their bodies?
Good point.
Find a live one. That's what I want to see.
But he married the very famous shield maiden Lagertha. Lagertha is another semi-mythical figure. We know who her children are. We don't know much about her.
Shield maiden just means they are also
a female warrior.
Okay.
Yeah. Now the concept, the difference between like a shield maiden and like a Viking warrior was largely they protected the home and the hearth. That was their job. The Viking men typically went out and raided, and the women stayed home. Now that does not mean that they just farmed. Now farming back then meant you had a stick and you dug in the ground. Like that farming back then was brutal. Like it's hard now, but there's no tractors. And you're basically just scraping a living out of really crappy soil, especially in Norway. I'm not knocking Norway. It's cold and it's not suited for farming. So their populations are always small at this time, and that's why they're expanding everywhere and trying to colonize in southern areas or in western areas because the land is just better.
And why they eat pickled fish.
Yeah, and that's what prompted a lot of their explorations. They're like, well, we have wood so we can make boats, but we don't have a lot of farmland, and we need that. We need wealth to build these ships, to pay people. So they raided and over time built up larger raiding forces, which eventually turned into colonization forces. So the Vikings go all over the place. They go to Iceland, they go to Greenland, they go to what is known as Vinland. Vinland is America.
What?
Yeah, Leif Erikson went to America in like the 900s.
What?
Yeah, way before some Italian guy did.
Yikes.
And you know what he didn't do? He didn't genocide the locals. Oh. So despite the Viking history of being raiders and pillagers, they don't genocide. They eventually, I mean, they kill people, but they eventually start to blend and merge.
He also didn't direct Home Alone.
Truth. Although that's Chris, not Christopher.
Just
totally
a way to disguise it.
Yeah, that's another one of the immortal Illuminati. It's like, well, I changed my accent and now I direct Macaulay Culkin. You go fight these two guys who are trying to sneak into your house. Kill them.
Columbus. All right.
Chris Columbus. All right. So Ragnar Lothbrok is the height of reputation. He's considered like the ultimate Viking.
Yeah.
Lothbrok means hairy pants.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. The reason he's called that is because he had to fight this serpent that apparently could just bite through like steel. So he thought, I'm going to make like clothes out of like a really thick hide.
Sure.
And then he covered it in like tar, which is probably just gross. But then the creature couldn't actually bite through. It would be useless against like a sword, but it prevented like this serpent from biting it. Okay. And then he killed the beast. So that's
hairy tarry pants.
Hairy tarry pants. Right. Just junk clothes.
Yeah.
It's like he was doing some roofing gig. Just fell and hit a dog on the way.
Look at that.
Oh, this is my life.
The snake can't bite through this.
I think you know what it actually probably, he like walked through like a muck pit and then just kept walking and it picked up like burrs, like having a dog run through like a prairie and it comes out like, what are you covered in? It's so I could fight the snakes.
Sure.
So there's different versions of like how that story goes down, but he's this famous Viking.
Yeah.
At one point, he raided England with a pretty sizable force, and he was just wrecking things in Northumbria, and King Aella did not appreciate this.
No.
So Aella, having basically just total control over a pretty big country, focuses it all on this one raider and his band, and it is a massacre. Like, he crushes Ragnar in battle because he gets this overwhelming military, surrounds him, crushes him, and keeps Ragnar alive. Then his soldiers strip him naked and throw him in a pit full of snakes.
Oh.
He does not survive.
He wasn't wearing his special pants.
Apparently, in the story, he was originally wearing his special pants, and the snakes couldn't bite him, so they're like, oh, well, we'll just take off his clothes.
Oh.
Ah, no, my special pants!
Special snake pants.
Crap! So that's the story.
Yeah, okay.
What is...
Never let him take your special pants.
This is probably all conflated. What may have happened, this is just my assumption, Ragnar's a raider and a warrior and a king. He shows up with an army. He gets captured. He is thrown into a pit of snakes, which would have been a thing that people might have done to be particularly nasty.
Well,
and he dies.
Yeah.
Regardless of...
We gotta do some of this pit of snakes we got here.
This is the Viking version of what happened, of what triggers an event. Because in 866, the Great Heathen Army, as it's known in England, lands in England.
Hey.
This is a force of like 10,000 Viking warriors who are all really pissed off.
Hungry.
They are not just like here to raid. This is a force of just unbelievable size that nobody's really expecting, and they land in Northumbria. And apparently it's for vengeance. The Viking version is that Ragnar Lothbrok's sons, Ubba, Fitzurk, Bjorn Ironside, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, and Ivar the Boneless led this army. We know that a few of them are real characters.
Ivar the Boneless. No way.
Ivar the Boneless was actually listed as one of the leaders of the Great Heathen Army in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle.
What does that even mean, Ivar the Boneless? Is he a blobby kind of guy?
So here's a fascinating thing about Ivar. There's a couple of different versions of why he's called that. One is that he was crippled and could not walk.
Sure.
So he was unable to handle it. Now, I think that's the one that has been shown in like television. There's a television show called Vikings. It's on the History Channel. This is the story of Ragnar Lothbrok and his sons. Ivar is shown as not having like good legs. His legs are just withered little stumps.
Boneless.
And he's like left to die as a baby.
Oh.
And then they regret it, and then they save the baby. And then he grows up to be particularly mean and vicious and compensates for his not functioning legs by just being mean.
Okay.
It is unlikely, not by virtue of whether or not the people would have just othered him and cast him out of society, because actually Vikings sometimes valued people who were different.
Sometimes.
It depended.
Okay.
For instance, if this is going to stir up controversy, but sometimes people are born neither male nor female. They have both sets of genitalia.
Even in Viking times?
Yes, because it's a biological thing that happens. Sometimes they are born with no genitalia, and this happens. This is why this whole myth of there's only two genders or two sexes
We
or
have
whatever.
just gained and lost.
We just gained and lost followers. It's just historically and biologically there are variations, and it's rare. It's not like 20% of people just aren't this way or are this way. The majority of people are born male or female, but there's intersex and there's a lot of variations.
Is that why he's the boneless?
That could possibly be it. That actually could possibly be it. He was born without parts. But these people were often treated like as blessed by the gods because they were both male and female, and there's something mystical about that to the Viking culture. And they would be given like not separate but equal. Like they usually lived apart from society, but as like a position of respect. And they were considered like wise people and in touch with the gods.
Yeah,
so
that actually makes more sense.
The people would usually provide for them like with small offerings. Like they didn't usually have to work, and they were like seers and mystics a lot of the time. Now, of course, this is mysticism and all that jazz, so maybe that's not accurate or anything like that. And there's obviously no special powers being associated with private parts.
Not that we know of.
Not that we're aware of. Maybe. If you've seen it, let me know, because that'd be cool. But they were not like cast out and murdered. So even in Viking cultures, which is considered one of the most brutal, savage, and cutthroat in the history of the world, part 2. That just came out.
Yeah.
Sorry. Part 3.
Part 2.
The Vikings aren't mentioned in it. So
I don't know. I haven't
part
seen
3,
it.
maybe. They are still respectful of people for being born different than them. Maybe we can learn from that.
Maybe.
It's
weird. Do you want to learn other things from the Vikings?
Well, that one was good.
Okay, that's a good one.
Traveling was good. They made
Travel
really
good.
cool
Sure.
boats. They were great explorers and merchants.
Just what happened when they get there.
Fancy pants that repel serpents.
Sure.
That's pretty cool.
Right.
The whole murdering unarmed people, I don't think that's good for anybody.
Well,
but everybody did that, regardless of culture.
Oh, okay.
The Vikings are just famous for it because the Christians wrote about it, and Vikings didn't write down their histories until 200 years later.
Okay.
Because again, we know that like Aella butchered and murdered his own people. And there were originally 7 kingdoms in England. And by this point, there are 3 because they killed each other and stole their stuff.
Whoops.
So
Consolidation.
wholesale violence and murder is not like a Viking exclusive thing. And bear in mind, when they raided these unarmed places, they didn't kill everybody. They just killed some people.
Your Honor, we didn't kill everybody.
I'm not trying to split hairs, but there's a subtle difference between exterminating a population, which happens, and Christopher Columbus looking at you, and what the Vikings did, which oftentimes there's fighting and conquest because 2 rival societies meet up.
Yeah.
But we'll get into that. So now this great heathen army shows up. Ivar the Boneless. We were talking about what he might have been called, why he was called that.
Yeah.
Another reason is the Vikings tended to be lewd and make jokes about each other.
Sure.
So they might have meant that he was impotent and could not.
A little trouble with the ding dong.
Good, a little problem with the Ivar's bones. Like he was boneless.
Right.
And he might have just taken that as like a badge of like, oh, you want to mock me? Well, I'm just going to wear it and show that it doesn't bother me and just, fine, call me that. Another one is that he didn't feel pain and therefore did not have bone. Like he must not have bones because he couldn't feel pain. He was like invulnerable. He was vulnerable, but at least he didn't show it.
Yeah.
So there's different versions of the character. The reason why I don't think he was probably crippled is it just, if you have some kind of very horrible malady, like your legs just do not function, there are other medical complications that go along with it, usually internal, and the chances of you surviving to adulthood and then achieving that kind of legendary status at that time is, I think, impossible.
Yeah.
Nowadays, we have these wonderful advances in medicine and technology that can help people who are born with physical maladies. And that's not to say people with physical maladies have not grown and done amazing things. But at that time, in that culture, in that landscape, it would have been virtually impossible.
No, people would, stub their toe, get an
infection and die. So it's just a matter of, if he's going around, there's not wheelchairs, the crutches, he'd probably get like infections from just walking around with crutches, and then to sail across the Atlantic to fight, or the North Sea, I should say, to fight in England and then achieve status as a warrior. Also in the English Chronicles, he's not mentioned as having any kind of physical issue, and his title's never mentioned.
Oh, they would have brought that up.
Yeah, they would have. They would have been like, so this guy who can't really walk, and he's just carried around on a shield, which is a thing, or he had crutches, or he just dragged himself across the ground like a very angry
he beat us.
Guy. He crushed us. I mean, they might have left that out. Like, guys, we got beaten up by a guy who's got no legs.
Back to training, boys.
Scratch out boneless. Be like the mighty, horrible, terrifying conqueror guy. He was 18 feet tall and breathed fire. Okay, well, you got to temper that. Okay, he's just some guy. Ivar.
17 feet tall.
He was Ivar. But in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, he's known as Ivar, Eimar, Emar, Ivar, Ibar. There's a confusion, too, because there was an Eimar who was a king of Ireland. And they think that they might have been the same guys. Okay, so in some, like, fictional accounts, like in video games and movies and stuff, they make it just the same dude. But
easier to cast.
There are recordings of like who his father might have been, and he was an Irish guy, so it's confusing. And also, Ivar and Eimar were pretty common names back then.
It sounds like it.
It's like being Sven. or Bjorn. There's tons of Bjorns. So then there's Bjorn Ironside, who's named so because he was like invulnerable in combat. He was just tough and hard to kill. There's Sigurd Snake in the Eye, who supposedly had like a snake look image in like his eye. It was probably like a shift in his pupil. It also was the snake was like a symbol of wisdom. Mm-hmm. So it was thought maybe it's because he was like really good at almost like foresight.
Yeah, okay.
You know those people that can see something coming a mile away,
a snake in his
and they're
eye.
like he's got a snake in the eye. Sigurd Snake in the Eye, because it's not snake-eyed, it's literally snake in the eye. So or maybe he had like a weird snaky-looking eye. Who knows? It could have been. Ubba is a really famous on both sides. So there's Ubba and Ivar are very strongly mentioned in both the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and the Viking chronicles of what happened. So they're thought to maybe be the two main leaders of the army.
Okay.
Apparently they were really good at it, because you have to think about what it takes to get 10,000 Vikings who don't necessarily follow a unified king and only follow somebody for reputation.
Yeah.
And
get them all on one boat.
And standing on top of each other. This is going to be a rough trip, boys.
Carnival cruise ship.
This is actually the story of the first Carnival cruise line.
Okay.
It was the Vikings built one boat, 10,000 guys on a buffet. The food ran out. They're like, we need food. Stop in England.
We're going to load you up alphabetically.
Do you guys have shrimp?
Ivan's over there, Sven's over there.
We need the shrimp. Do you have the shrimp? We ran out for the cocktails on the
boat.
boat.
North Sea shrimp.
North Sea shrimp. It's very famous. Yes, England? No?
Sure.
All they have is sheep. We can have mutton.
Sure.
Mutton's good. Lamb is good.
Stack it onto the boat.
Put it in there. It's not going to go well on the shrimp days, but we'll figure it out. Huh? We could carve it to look like shrimp. Sigurd's really good at making things look like snakes. That's like a shrimp.
I feel like the Vikings' love for shrimp is overinflated in our discussion
a little bit. Can you guys make pickled fish?
There you go.
Well, I was just going with the shrimp in the buffet.
Sure.
That's a thing. I think.
I don't know where shrimp are from. I feel it's more warm water.
I think you can have cold water shrimp. There's shrimpers
if you know anything about shrimp, let us know.
Let us know.
We know nothing.
This is not part of my research that I did. So,
shrimp.
The Great Heathen Army arrives and just wrecks everything.
Yeah.
Now, in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and the Viking Chronicle, they both agree that Aella and Osbert, the guy he deposed, somehow either make amends, or Osbert was still a landed gentleman, so he was expected to raise a household guard, and they show up to fight this Great Heathen Army.
Yep.
With their own army.
Of not heathens.
According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, they're surrounded on two sides, and basically the army gets pressed, so they're back-to-back fighting against the Vikings and just get crushed by the press and massacred.
Ooh.
Aella's killed, Osbert's killed.
No, they were just had a peace.
The Viking version is much better. The battle result is the same, although there's a fun little story where Ivar shows up and he's like, I don't actually want to fight the English. Their army looks pretty scary. I tell you what, I will leave for a piece of land that I can fit onto that I can fit an ox hide over.
Okay.
And
sounds like a trick.
Yep. Well, Ivar might be boneless, but he's not brainless, because according to this chronicle, Aella agrees. And Ivar takes one ox hide and cuts it into teeny, tiny strips and surrounds the city of York with the teeny, tiny strips. And he just goes,
so smart.
That's what I did. And you swore before your God to acknowledge this. Aha, aha. And Aella's like, I hate Vikings. I wasn't going to bring that one up because that's just ridiculous.
Well, throttle this boneless guy.
I hate him. That's why they call him the boneless. By the time that they got done strangling him, he just had no bones left in his neck. He was a bobblehead.
It was funny. It was a joke. It was just a joke.
I was just kidding.
It's a little parlor trick.
And then after he got York, he banned all of the English together against Aella and joined up with his brothers again, and then they fought Aella.
Oh, right.
The Saxon Chronicle does not talk about the oxide. It doesn't talk about any of this, and this is
why
Vikings love a good story. They
but I mean,
love a good story.
even if it was true, why would they mention?
Why would you mention that?
He screwed us over.
We got outsmarted by a stupid guy with no bones. from a country we think is inferior.
Oxhide.
And all he did was surround our town with some basically strips of leather. And he said, I own this. Ugh.
Yeah, I wouldn't mention
Well,
it either.
at least it was a small town. It was York. Son of a gun. You mean that giant, like, trade center in the north? Yup.
I don't care how thin you cut that oxhide. You gotta cut it thinner.
You gotta cut it thinner. It's just thread at that point. He like spun it into thread somehow. But what ends up happening is Aella's army is crushed, and the Vikings the brothers get a hold of him, and he's either defeated in battle directly by them, but Obba, Bjorn, Sigurd, Fitzurk, and good old Boneless.
Yep.
They get their hands on him. And they have a very specific plan for what they're going to do with old Aella. They put him on his knees.
Okay. This is before he's dead?
He's very much alive.
Okay.
He's very much alive. They want him alive. I'm not sure if this is part of the Vikings show or if this is part of actual like Norse poetry, but there is a line of how the little piggies would bleat when they found out how the old boar died.
Ooh.
So these guys are livid that their father was not just killed, but killed in like the most un-Viking way. So there's this view of Vikings when they die, they go to Valhalla to fight eternally, but that only happens if you die in combat.
Yeah.
By throwing the most famous adventurer and their father into a pit to be killed by snakes, serpents, the things that crawl on their bellies and we step upon kind of a view.
And we forgot how to protect ourselves with our special pants.
And then they took away his pants. But their view is he was stripped naked. Yeah. He had no weapons. He had no way of defending himself. He had no way of dying with honor. And he can't go to Valhalla because of how he was killed.
Right. So
not by the violence of man, but by just random animals biting him to death.
Sure.
That's the ultimate dishonor, but then also by their culture and their deeply held religious views, he doesn't get to go to their idea of heaven, ever. He will be perpetually tormented because of this. Yeah. And it's just this ultimate disrespect. Whether he was actually like stripped naked or done this way, the idea is that their father was murdered directly by this guy. Yeah. They're pissed. So they put him on his knees.
Okay.
And they strip his shirt off, and each brother hold his arms because he's got to hold still for this.
Sure, it might hurt otherwise.
And they take a knife and they slice down his spine, just enough to peel the skin back.
Sure.
Then they take out an axe, which they're very good with because half these guys have worked on building boats, and they hack away his ribs so that they split open. This is called the blood eagle. Then they take out his lungs and drape them over his shoulders from behind. So he looks like this bird in flight, all bloodied and gross and ripped apart. And that is the Viking blood eagle.
Oh, okay.
They get their ultimate revenge, and he's alive until the end of this.
Yeah, well, yes.
So there's this storyline of this is that if you survive without making a sound, you go to directly to special guest heaven in Valhalla.
Okay, well, that's nice.
That's super, because you only do this to the very worst offenders. Yeah. You don't do this to some decent guy. You do this to traitors.
Well, it does seem like a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and it's horrifying.
Yeah.
It's not like you just go, oh, ribs. This is messy and gross work. But the guys who are good at it could keep you alive while they did it. You probably would go into shock. Now, that's the Viking version. Even in the English version, his body is left for the crows. Oh, okay. So in either version, whether it's this Blood Eagle horror show or his body is ripped apart by birds and therefore he'd be dying on his stomach, so his back would be rent open by birds, Blood Eagle, birds. Oh, okay, There's references to birds and blood in both stories. So Aella is horrifically butchered for this, or he just dies in battle. Whichever version you want.
Either way, he's dead.
Either way, he's very, very dead. The Great Heathen Army goes on to not just conquer York, but they conquer the majority of Northumbria. Over the years, the Vikings don't just conquer this. They create what's called the Danelaw, which is ruled by the Danes. That's the Vikings. Yeah. Because Viking is just a profession. Danes are what they are largely referred to, even though they come from Norway, Sweden, parts of modern Finland.
Yeah, and Daneland.
And in Daneland, which is not Denmark at all. Jutland, which is actually part of Denmark. I know, I'm running out of time. I'm just trying to get into the far-reaching consequences of this. They create the Danelaw, which is basically Viking-owned turf. Jorvik is now York becomes Jorvik. I think it was whatever it was before it was York is Jorvik now, and then it becomes York in modern English. We call it this. The Vikings start to blend in with English culture. They never leave. They're never like kicked out.
Yeah.
They start creating the Danegeld, which is you pay us or we kill you, to other countries. There are massive wars, there's violence, and eventually it results with a fellow named Canute becoming king of England, Denmark, and Norway all at the same time, spread across this huge amount of territory.
Yeah.
And he was a king of England.
Canute,
which I think we've talked about Canute. I don't know if I actually did a full episode on King Canute, but I know I've mentioned King Canute.
It's been mentioned.
As kind of this powerhouse guy. This is the culmination of Viking power. And then after his death, it eventually all fell apart. He showed up because a bunch of Danes were massacred by local English folk in violation of like a peace treaty. So it caused a whole thing. But it's really interesting. Now we've got Vikings living in England. And to this day, there are Vikings. That's why we have words that are very Nordic sounding. 26% of our words in English are based on Anglo-Saxon, but they're also the most commonly used words in our language.
The first ones to be written down.
Yep, a lot of them were written down, and that became like a core culture. So now we've got the blending of the Romans, the Anglo-Saxons, now the Vikings, and then in 1066 the French show up. Well, they're the Normans, and the Normans are actually half Viking, half French. So that's twice the Vikings conquering England. So that is the death of King Aella on the 21st of March, 867 is when they defeated them in battle, and a great heathen army conquered northern England, and they blended with him.
Well, sorry, King Aella, that had to end so horribly, but
he had it coming. That was a bad guy.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today's little history lesson.
Yeah, horror show.
If you have any comments or suggestions or corrections, please put those in the comments. Like and subscribe. Consider becoming a Patreon.
Tell us about shrimp.
If you want to know
where they come from. Great. Where did those things come from?
And then join us next week. We will be going to Egypt.
We'll be in Egypt.
We'll be in Egypt talking about Saladin becoming the Emir of Egypt.
Yep. It's 26th March, 1169. Yeah. We talked about Saladin before, and now we get to know who's the guy.
Oh, boy. So see us then.
All right.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks.